You all.
I will
Good morning, sir.
Post
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Very good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Sir, can you please enable
Yes.
share my screen?
Good morning, sir. Post ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
I hope screen is visible now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So, dear participants, first I'd like to thank HRDC for considering me to take this session. The first session will be on communication skills. You are all already learned a lot about communication skills in your lifetime and in your career. And this will be some interesting interactive session if you ask more and more questions in between, so that we can continue with that. Because always I learn so many things in each and every sessions when we interact with the whole population. And the target population I'm speaking about, that's you. Very glad to meet you all today for considering me here. And first, I'd like to share the meaning of communication skills. It is not the actual meaning, but the word communication came from the Latin word that is communicare, which is literally which is to share. The meaning of communicare is to share. So what to share, how to share, why to share, these are the questions. When we look into communication skills, we see all these questions. So everybody will think about how to share, because communication is a process by which people create and share information with one another in order to reach a common understanding. Here we have to observe the word common understanding, because we all know that communication has a communication cycle wherein sender sends the message to the receiver and receiver gives the feedback back to the sender. That is the beauty of communication. When we talk about this particular cycle, there should be common understanding between the messenger and the receiver. That is the intention of communication skill. Because if there is no common understanding, that means communication has to be done with the help of the receiver, has to understand the communication or a message with the same intention that the messenger has intended to be. Whatever intention is there on part of the messenger, that has to be conveyed to the receiver in the same way, that has to be understood by the receiver in the same way. So these are the various things we have to know about communication, because even if you know a lot of things, even if you have many qualifications and degrees, and we know many information, if we could not express it with proper or effective communication, it will be of no use, because the receiver may not get in the proper way or what we have been intended to be. That's why communication plays very important role, not only in our teaching, in all our day-to-day life. That's why when we become successful in life, communication has a larger role in it, because we need to have common understanding between other people. That is the main thing. As a teacher, as teachers, we should know how to communicate effectively, so that everybody who is listening to us or who is having a rapport with us need to have a good communication or effective communication. So this is the process of communication. As we know, the transmission of message will happen like this. First, communication will form in the mind of the messenger. That means when a person gives a message, that will be formed in the minds of the messenger in the form of encoded message, and that will be converted and or decoded, and that message will be transmitted to the receiver. And that receiver will again receive the same message in the form of encoded message. I'll give you a beautiful example. If you don't know the language, how can we understand the language? How can we understand that communication? There's a problem, because the language itself is a encoded message. If we understand the language, then we can easily understand. We don't understand German, French, Chinese languages, so we could not understand their language and we could not understand the communication effectively, because of the language barrier. So that's how the message will be always be generated through encoded in encoded form, and that will be converted to or decoded and sent to the messenger, the receiver, and that receiver again will be received in the form of encoded message, and that encoded message has to be decoded by her or him, because that message, if it is not encoded, that will be of no use. There will be no effect in communication. That's what we call communications cycle. In the middle, we can see a word that is noise, that is nothing but a communication barrier. However, our communication is effective. There will be a lot of barriers, maybe natural barriers or man-made barriers or self-made barriers will be there. So these are the various things we have to observe when we look into this communication cycle. And of course, when receivers give proper feedback to the messenger, then that communication will be effective. Even that communication feedback will be understood by the messenger or a speaker, and that will be understood in the form of encoded message, and it will be decoded in our brain, and that will be reflected to the further messages that communicator intended to give. Therefore, a common understanding between the messenger and the receiver has to be there to understand the communication properly, because communication happens in two ways. We all know that verbal communication and non-verbal communications are there. These are the two types of communication usually we come across while we speak to some other person. And more interestingly, communication always happens with a two-way process. That's very important to be noted. And further we'll discuss about that. And there are various forms of communication. Oral communication, we say, written communication, visual communication. Even today, it is a very popular type of communication, that is digital communication, or we may say that electronic communication. So these are various forms. First, I would like to concentrate on non-verbal communication. I'll tell you why, because there is a research study which has given emphasis on non-verbal communication. It is a Mehrabian study. He has identified that non-verbal communication is 93% effective when we communicate to somebody. So that's why I have taken this non-verbal communication, that is the sending or decoding messages with emotional content. When we say emotional content, we have to understand that our emotions cannot be generated or projected through our conscious mind. It has to be done through our unconscious or to many extent subconscious mind. So we cannot, we don't know what our subconscious mind or unconscious mind happens to be when we communicate with another person or another group. So we have to understand what is that emotional content properly. There is a study done in University of California in 1967. Professor Albert Mehrabian has conducted a research study on this. Even today, this study is so popular that many studies after that, they have taken the references of Albert Mehrabian's study for conducting researches on communication skills. Even though there are so many criticisms on this study, many have been believed that this study has a value of finding a lot about communication skills. So in this study, words are only 7% effective, that we call verbal communication. As we know, whatever words, vocabulary, the sentences we make, all this comes under verbal communication. The meaning of the word has to be found in dictionary, whatever available in our field. That is what we call as verbal communication. If you don't find the meaning of the word in the dictionary, that is not verbal communication. That will come under non-verbal communication. I'll explain it to you later. You can ask your doubts and questions in between, no problem. You can write down and you can ask at the end also if you are provided with more time. No issues. Please clarify your doubts as and when I go through all these things, so that we can further study about non-verbal communication, verbal communication in detail. So our tone of voice is 38% effective with the finding of this study we have understood. And this tone of voice is also considered as non-verbal communication, because I can give a lot of examples. when a singer sings a song with a good lyric, that will be appreciated and taken by all people. But unfortunately, if I'm not a singer, if I use the same lyric, same tune, if I sing a song, that may not be effective as it is. So our tone of voice, in the sense, when I speak something, I have to follow so many things like modulation, stress, accent, intonation. These are all based on or dependent on our emotions. That's why nonverbal communication is an emotional content, and this tone of voice is considered as nonverbal communication. And lastly, but not least, nonverbal clues are 55% effective. These are pure nonverbal communication, even though we have a lot of para nonverbal communication which is going with that, like tone of voice. So this is the finding of this Professor Albert Mehrabian study in 1967. And we have to see here, whatever we speak, that sometimes what happens, we do a lot of verbalism. We call it as excessive verbalism in our classrooms, because we're all teachers here. We are discussing about classrooms and how to manage the classrooms with effective communication skills. So we have to understand that when we speak more, that may not be understood by the audience or the people in that particular way. So we have to understand that nonverbal communication has to be blended properly, so that it will give 93% of effectiveness when you take class or a session. So we have to give more priority to develop these kind of nonverbal skills. So for some people, maybe nonverbal skills might have been developed from their birth. They are born with that kind of gift, and they'll become good leaders, successful persons in their life with no proper training. But to some, it has to be developed through proper training. That's why we are calling communication skill. When we say skill has to be always practiced and produced. That's why we use the word communication skill. So nonverbal communication plays a vital role by having 93% of effectiveness in whatever we talk to or share to other person or any other group. With this note, I would like to tell you the components of nonverbal communication. That's the first word coined by the researchers in the field of communication. The first term is kinesics, which is also called as a field of body language. We know that body language plays a very vital role in communication skill, because even when we don't say anything to the other person, everybody will understand what's happening with the person, what is happening with me or someone who is giving message. So body motions such as shrugs, foot tapping, drumming, fingers, eye movements such as winking, facial expression, gestures, these are all comes under body language, and this will be generated through our emotional content. In subconsciously or unconsciously, we do a lot of things. We cannot deceive the people with our words, with contrasting body language. That's how body language plays a vital role in communication skills. If you ask what is the role of kinesics in institutional setup, whether it will be in a school or a college or a university department, any educational institution, if you take, when we enter the campus itself, when students or some other people look at us, they easily understand what is going on in our mind through our way of walking, through the body languages that we express to other person. If we are smiling, whether we are having a very pleasant or effective facial expression or desirable facial expression or not, these will be understood easily through body language. That's why this particular area has been coined as kinesics. And the second area is proxemics. It is the area of spacing or distance between one object or to another object or a person to another person. So this proximity means use of space to signal privacy or attraction. We all know that everybody has a comfort zone. it may differ from one person or one individual to another individual. When we talk about comfort zone, for strangers, our comfort zone will be more. For new people or the people who have been introduced to us recently, our comfort zone will be more. But for the people who have been who are very much attached to us, who are very much familiar to us, the comfort zone will become less and less. And for example, when we go home with our spouse, with our parents, we can sit and talk to them with a close distance. So proximity will be more with the people whom we know. But it is vice versa in the case of strange people. So when we are in the classroom, we have to understand how much proximity has to be maintained from one person to another person, or the group of students to teacher. And of course, approximately 10 to 12 feet will be ideal from the first bench students to the dais. When we talk to them individually, or when we talk to them in a group, maybe it depends on person to person. You cannot exactly rigidly say that this is the proximity and comfort zone. We have to understand through the emotions or emotional content. For example, we go near to a person, if the person doesn't feel comfortable with our presence, physical presence very nearby, then we have to take some physical distance. If everybody feels comfortable, there is no question of having more distance or spacing between them. So this is a very huge area, Proximix, because sometimes even though our body language is very effective, if we don't follow the thumb rules of these Proximix that we have understood through our emotional content, our communication effectiveness may be low, because there are so many research studies have been done on this Proximix. And the another area is haptics. This is the area of touch, because we sense so many things through touch, because skin is one of the sensory organs which perceives a lot of things and which gives signal immediately to our brain. So when we touch the people, they have to feel comfortable. The desirable or good touch has to be maintained between opposite genders. That is true. But when we talk about the classroom situation, what type of desirable touch has to be there? How effectively we can maintain or build a rapport between one person to another person? How effectively we can communicate to other person with the help of simple thing like touch? And touching on the back of a person will give some inspiration, motivation to that person. Touching on the head of the person feels like giving them some ashirvada or blessings to that person. So these are the various techniques that we can follow. Whenever we feel that it is a time to touch them and tell something to inspire them, please go ahead. But in that case, we should be very sensitive to notice the gender issues, local issues, traditional, cultural issues. These are the various hidden factors or interventions that has to be noticed. And even this haptics has to be generated and tuned from our intentional and emotional content. We have to understand the difference between good touch, bad touch, desirable touch, undesirable touch. So this is one of the areas of communication, non-verbal communication skill. And another area is oculesics. We call that in simple term as eye contact. So eye contact is a different is different than staring. So in my further slides, I'm going to focus more on eye contact with a diagram so that we can skip it now. And chronemics is a term used for use of time and waiting period and also pausing, because the time is very important as well as timing. The proper timing has to be maintained when we speak to some person or audience. So that use of time is appropriate. We all know that we are teachers. When we use some teaching learning materials to the group in a classroom, at what time it is better to use. And even that waiting period is very crucial, because we all know that if anybody waits for us, they will get disturbed, distracted with various things. So we need not make them to wait for a longer time. In another situation, that waiting period will enhance curiosity. It will give some kind of impression that that person is very important, and it has to be taken time for waiting. So different types of meanings for waiting, pausing, use of time has to be considered in nonverbal communication. What best time we use, what best timing we use, when we use, how we are using that time, all these counts. In the case of pausing also, pausing is different term from stopping, because when we say stop, we immediately stop. There is no intention, purpose. But in the case of pausing, there is some intention, there is some purpose. Therefore, we say that pausing is a purposeful stop. We have to understand why to pause, when to pause. In the further slides, I may try to explain more about it. And one more area of nonverbal communication is olfactics. It is the area of smell. Sometimes we feel pleasant through fragrances. Sometimes we feel very bad with bad odors. So all these counts when we say that olfactics, say about olfactics, because we all know that our psychology plays very important role in the purview of in the background of our sensory organs. When we talk about our sensory organs, even the smell which we inhale will play a major role in our psychological tuning. And we always feel pleasant with the good smell. If you take the educational implications of smell, when we learn something, that has to be learnt in a pleasant atmosphere or ambience. That pleasant atmosphere and ambience has to have a very good fragrance or very good smell. That's more important. And in the case of chemistry classrooms, those who have done laboratory experiments in chemistry, biology, and science classes, who very much know the importance of smell, because we learn so many things through smell, the chemical smells and various smells around us in the nature will give us a lot of, that's why the aromatherapy, that particular concept has been generated. So when we have a good aromatic fragrance with us in our ambience, the learning effect will be more, the communication effect will be more. This is one of the things that has to be considered in nonverbal communication. Another area is vocalics, that is tone of voice or quality of voice, volume, and also the speed of voice. As I said earlier, modulation, stress, intonation, all these plays. Even though this is a para-linguistic area, we say para-linguistic because it always go with the language. When we speak language, we used to have all these body language, olfactics, haptics, all these things. In our Proximix, everything will be paralinguistic and go hand in hand with our language, that is verbal communication. So in the case of vocalics, you see that the tone of voice is very important, and timbre, that is quality of voice, is important. Even if we express so many things, having a lot of information, if our voice is not audible to everyone in the classroom or in a group of among the group of audience, that effective communication effect will be less. Even sometimes we use amplifiers and microphone systems in the functions so that our voice has to reach each and everyone in that room. So we need to understand what is the proper audibility that has to be maintained in the classroom. Whether it is a small class having only 3 bench of students, 2 bench of students, 1 bench of students, without microphone also we can talk to them, and there should be no voice which should go outside the room and disturb other persons. So these are the things has to be noted and practiced as a skill. When we have to use the voice, raise the volume of the voice, and how our voice tone has to be practiced with proper skill, and how our quality of voice has to be practiced, and what about the speed, reasonable speed of the voice, that has to be considered. When a group knows the language with a lot of proficiency, when we say general Indian English, that is alien language that we are practicing in our country, then when I speak in English language, I have to maintain my speed and the volume of that voice in desirable manner, which has to meet the needs of all persons who are participating in my session or in my classroom. That's very important. These are the things has to be noted under vocalics. And of course, sound symbols are the paralinguistic arena where we are using a lot of sound symbols like grunting, and sometimes we use while recalling something, what I mean to say, and these are these kind of mumbling which we produce, which we don't find any glossary or meaning in dictionary. Those sound symbols are very much necessary, and it unconsciously emerges through our language aspect. Those sound symbols will give lot of effect, and those who are very much good with neuro-linguistic communication, they understand neuro-linguistic communication easily. They can understand these sound symbols through the movement of the eyes of that person. So those communication skills will be understood by everyone. Now, no one need to be specialized or read a lot of things about communication theoretically or practically. Everybody will, because that is the human nature. When we look at a person, when we look at somebody, when we listen to somebody's speech, automatically our mind has been genetically formulated to understand the communication skills. That too, these non-verbal communications will be easily understood by everybody. That's why those who are good in verbal communication may not always be successful and effective in the field of non-verbal communication. Those who are very good at non-verbal communication, they'll be always effective and successful, even though there is some lacuna in verbal communication that can be overcome through non-verbal communication. That is the effect of non-verbal communication. That's why language plays very important role, but not to the extent of giving more and more effect to the learner or the receiver. So we have to look into all these aspects. These are all psychological aspects, because we can practice this and increase the skill of doing all these things. And surprisingly, silence is also one of the areas of non-verbal communication. If you ask me how, because when you go to the classroom, if the class is very much disturbing, there is a lot of noise in the classroom. If a teacher stands in front of the student with silence, automatically that group will be silent to see what's happening with the teacher. Sometimes we know that in a lot of discussions, it is better to be silent if we know a lot of things and which we cannot express, and if we have the fear of denial. So silence is one of the tools which can be used in communication skill, because always we think that when we want to communicate something, we always have to talk. We always have to have effective body languages. Body language is like so many things that we have discussed, but silence is also an effective tool, and it gives some kind of unconditional information to the receiver to understand what's happening in our mind. So only thing we should know when to use this silence as a powerful tool in communication skills. Even the things like pausing, waiting, and secrecy, these are the various areas where we maintain silence so that to create effective communication to the audience. And of course, posture. The posture of standing and the posture while we sitting, this plays very important role. Easily we can one can understand the stance that we are projecting to them, and through that they can identify the confidence level, our willpower, our mind will be reflected through the position of our body. That is posture. So we have to understand what kind of posture has to be practiced. There are so much of things that has been studied under this area of posture in research area. So open posture, open gesture, or standing straight, leaning forward. There is some other meaning which will convey which we lean forward when we are speaking by holding a support of the table or a dais, and leaning backward by holding our hands on our side hips. So these are all convey different types of meanings that can be explained in future slides. And of course, adornment, what we wear, how we appear through other people, that will convey non-verbal communication a lot. That's why each profession has a dress code. As a teachers, we should know what proper dress code we have to have. Because our clothing, jewelry, hairstyle, the total appearance will give an idea to the a person who is audience or a person who is sitting or standing before us. So that adornment plays, this is also emotional content, because we want to project how we are before the group or a person. Therefore, we wear our own taste of clothing, jewelry, and hairstyles, which is emerged from our psychological attitude and behavior. So this has to be taken serious care when we want to communicate to the audience, target audience, and we should identify what we are. That's why we have to understand where we are talking, how we have to talk, and what we have to talk, and what group, what target group we are meeting with. These are all places. If you are a teacher, we should know what are the dress code, code of ethics that has to be followed in to the particular group. If they are primary school, secondary school, college level, and it all happens with a background of, it is all contextual, and it all happens with the background of tradition, culture, and what people we are meeting with, what age group audience we are meeting with. All these counts under adornment. So be attentive, careful, and learn the skill of adornment. That will play a major role in communication. And of course, locomotion is the another area of non-verbal communication, wherein walking, running, staggering limb, all these actions, what we do. Locomotion, we all know that the moving from one place to another place, the purposeful movement has to be there. And of course, these movements will reflect our health condition, our not only physical health, even our mental health, and our urgency, our curiosity, our need, our attitude, behavior, everything will be reflected to these locomotions. So we have to see that all these non-verbal communications has to be practiced as a skill, so that communication will become very effective. So some of the few selected non-verbal components of teachers that I have enlisted here, those are postures, gestures, facial expression, eye contact, space, appearance, that is what we just now discussed, audibility of voice, modulation in voice, fluency and speed of voice, pause. These are various things. If you take posture as one of the communication skill here, I can give one example, because it's a large area of study. What is socially desirable posture for a male or a female that can be shown through this picture? You may ask the question, why man has to stand like this? Why woman has to stand like this? Even that is contextual, and it is location specific, or cultural specific, or traditional specific. Usually our genetic code or DNA has given us some kind of posture, the basic postures and natural postures that can be adopted and practiced as it cannot be practiced at all. Sometimes it will come with our birth, and it is natural. And the desirable standing posture for a man is having foot apart with 1 feet or half feet distance, and feet closed with women feet. So these are all the cultural specific and traditional specific, what we say. And these are the desirable posture for male and female. As a teacher, we should identify what type of posture we are projecting to the audience or students, and that can be corrected through our communication skills. Because when some other looks at us, some other people look at us, they have their own kind of imaginations and expectations, what we say, from a teacher like us. So that has to be met through all these kind of non-verbal communication that is socially desirable. I mean to say again this word, because this plays very important aspect. What I want to be is different. How I have to be by considering social desirability, that is different. So we have to go with the terminology social desirability. Therefore, though these various things will play a major role. And when I talk about gestures, we have open gestures we'll do, closed gestures we'll do. This is also one of the vast area. What are the closed gestures? Closing our palm, putting our palm in the pockets or in the backside of our body. These are all closed gestures. That is not desirable. That has to be overcome. That has to be banned from our communication skills totally, because it reflects our mind. We cannot deceive the audience through our verbal communication. Sometimes if we have closed gestures, because gestures always linked with our limb movements. When we say limb movements, of course, our arm, our shoulders, our legs, all these counts. When I use some gestures, which is open gesture, that will give very good effect to the audience. So in the picture, you can see a lady teacher is having an open gesture on the other one side, explaining some concept to the students. In another, on the other side, another lady is standing with the hands putting in the pocket. So easily we can see and understand the mind of these two lady teachers with the help of open and closed gestures. Because maybe the teacher on the other side have putting their keeping their both palms inside the pocket, maybe thinking that she wants to express something to the audience, but somebody is explaining, she wants to keep her information hidden at that particular point of time. That may be the idea of the teacher. So a teacher who is explaining intentionally want to explain without any hindrance or any hidden facts. Therefore, the teacher might have been using open gesture. In another picture, a male teacher is also using open gesture in front of the audience, using the limbs effectively and considering the gesture, open gesture in the classroom. Many times we talk to the people, we use a lot of gestures. We have to understand and develop the skill of having open gesture, because when you use our hands, shoulders, whatever limbs, limb movements that we use, everybody will look at it, and their mind unconsciously absorb all these things, and our communication definitely depends on these aspects. The messages will be projecting through various actions like this. And another area is facial expression. I would like to focus on this because usually we always give our facial expression through our emotions. We cannot more than 5 seconds or 10 more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes. We cannot keep our face in smiling mode, because everything is tuned and generated from our psychological background. Our emotions play a major role in these facial expressions. You can see the middle picture where a small baby is smiling to us. So we want to see that picture again and again because of the pleasantness of the face. But in other pictures, we can see various types of emotions that we don't want to look at more. And there are easily we can give an example of the emoticons, emojis that we use in WhatsApp, Facebook, all these social media are definitely using this facial expression through the animated objects. So what kind of facial expressions we need to present something to the audience effectively? That's what we have to understand now. So facial expression is an area where we have to develop our skill to have a beautiful smile in our face and beautiful expressions, appropriate expressions that has to be made to the audience. That is very important. And how it has to be practiced? It cannot be practiced in vacuum. Our psychology, our mind has to be tuned positively in order to meet all these expected behaviors, because artificially we cannot do all these emotional contents under nonverbal communication. Everything has to come from our mind. Everything is depending on our positive psychology. Therefore, love everyone, feel everyone as your friends, your loved ones, so that automatically all these nonverbal communications will emerge from our body and our face. So this is one of the thing, and this is one of the very important areas, that is eye contact. Here you can see a green zone in between in a triangular shape. That is the area and effective area and proper area of eye contact I would like to mention here. Because when you look at zone B, it gives a meaning of arrogance or attitude of arrogance that can be projected from the messenger. And zone A, which will give some kind of inferiority complex and some kind of hesitation or some nasty things which are going to happen with zone A. So those zone A and zone B has to be avoided. And the triangular area in between is the area, desirable area, socially desirable as well as psychologically desirable area, where we have to have eye contact. As I said earlier, there is a difference between eye contact and staring. Because when you stay staring, if you stare at a person more than 2 seconds or 5 seconds and 10 seconds, it gives different meaning. And that staring is contextual and also location specific. And it differs from one country to another country, one area to another area, because the culture differs, the context differs, the gender with the opposite gender, the practice of eye contact is very essential, because they may feel stared in their particular context. Therefore, we should know what is eye contact. Eye contact is not staring. In that green zone, if we look at them, at least a fraction of a second, that will become eye contact. So one has to feel comfortable and to build a proper connection between the people and to build a proper rapport between the people. This eye contact plays a major role. If you see at a person and if you talk to the person, and that person will feel very happy and build very good eye contact. A lot of researches has been done on eye contact. There are so many successful people who practice this eye contact to take the attention of other people or the whole audience to them. Therefore, eye contact is very essential. And in the case of proximity, as I said, what best comfort zone is will be possible among the students, among the colleagues, among other people. We have to understand it. So when we really need to move to the students, we need to move because that is the purposeful movement we are doing. That purposeful movement is acceptable, where the proximity will be less. And even the students or other persons will appreciate it, and they will allow you to come into their comfort zone. But in the case of other undesirable aspects, the comfort zone has to be maintained properly. That is why we have to understand the skill of proximity. And appearance, as I said, as a teacher, we should identify we are in this profession, where we are in this country, in a country like India, what is the best dress code that has to be practiced, and what about jewelry, wearing jewelry, it has to be minimalized, so that our in our profession that has not been given more preference, and more glittering jewelries if we wear, what happens to the audience? The focus will be not on our speech, the focus will be on other things that has to be noticed. So appropriate, socially desirable appearance has to be maintained in the case of our clothing, jewelry, adornment, whatever it is. So that has to be taken care of. And of course, audibility is the area where sometimes we neglect. In a small classroom, we speak loudly. In a big classroom, we may speak not up to the mark. So reasonable audibility has to be maintained. If it is a class of hundreds to more than 100 students, then microphone is essential. The use of technology is essential, and that has to be maintained properly, so that the barriers of communications will be lessened. So all these things has to be noticed. And modulation, because when we look at singers, how specifically they make tunes and use the modulations. While in speech also, when we use modulation, we can give the best example of orators, and they practice preaching about devotional preachers like Harikate. You might have been heard that word Harikate. That is the story of God, which will be delivered by some divine, with a divine modulated voice. How attention has been grabbed to the audience to see the person with their modulation. And very popular, famous actors in film industry. Why they have been appreciated through their modulation of voice only, we can identify them. So how best we can modulate our voice, use proper stress and intonation in our voice so that it will reach the audience. And whenever, even without our physical appearance, only our voice will catch the audience. We can see the speeches of great people, great leaders in our country and abroad. We used to listen to them more and more. We love to have audio learning through them. So why? Because of their voice, timbre of voice, quality of voice, modulation of voice. So as a teacher, it is a duty for me to understand the importance of modulation, and we have to use it to overcome monotony and fatigue in the classroom. So everybody will enjoy your speech. And of course, fluency and speed has to be practiced in order to make the grab the attention of the audience, so that your speech will be more pleasant, will be more appealing to the audience. And of course, this is the purposeful stop, what I said about pausing, because there are three traffic lights which we usually see in traffic signals. And what is the purpose of pausing? That yellow light, when it comes, we have to be attentive. We have to be curious when the green light will switch on, so that I can move from the signal. That should be the intention of the speaker. When I am a teacher, I have to practice this pause. That pause has to arouse curiosity to seek some new or interesting information to the audience. That's why we use pausing. For example, in tape recorder or in some music audio players, we use pausing because that is intentional, and that is purposeful. When we want to stop and listen to other things, we pause it. And when we want to pause in the classroom as a teacher, if I want to say something about a very important point and to arouse curiosity, I may go for the skill of pausing, so that everybody will look at me and waiting for that curious moment to seek information from me. For that, I may pause. So these are the various examples we can give in the case of pausing in field of nonverbal communication. So all these are some glimpses of nonverbal communication. As I said earlier, it gives 93% of effectiveness to the audience. And of course, as a teacher, we should know how best we can build this skill, because everybody is not born with good communication skills, that too in the field of nonverbal communication. So as a teacher, how best I can use this, how best I can build these skills, that has to be practiced and practiced and practiced, and that has to be taken feedback by the students or somebody else in our classroom, so that we can really build this nonverbal communication, and we can meet that expectation of more than 90% effectiveness in our classroom. So the final note for nonverbal communication: please avoid excessive verbalism. It will give a lot of noise to the audience and students. So try to have a blend, a very good, pleasant blend of all these nonverbal communication, so that your communication, our communication will be more effective. It cannot come in one day. You may practice it for your whole lifetime. One or the other way, when your skill of communication skill increases along with this nonverbal communication skill, definitely that communication will be an effective communication. That's what I would like to say. Before going to verbal communication, I will expect some questions from the audience with all this nonverbal communication that I have discussed with you, so that it will become some interactive session, and can give a lot of information if you have any doubt with all these nonverbal communication components. Is there any question? Any questions to be asked? Please ask me, so that I can move on to verbal communication. I'll be having another 20 minutes time for that. Hope, audience, you can unmute your mic, ask me any questions related to nonverbal communications. So shall I?
Sir, please discuss again the chronemics.
Manas Das, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Chronemics.
nice to hear from you a question. Chronemics, you are asking about chronemics, the use of time. I'll give an example, sir. If you are going to a relative's house as a guest, or you are expecting some guest, and they tell that they will arrive around 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and you are waiting for them for lunch. Okay, when that guest will arrive at 3:30 or 4 p.m. without giving any information to you, how do you feel, sir?
Very bad, sir. Very bad.
Very bad. You will be starving, and you want to have lunch, and of course they are not given any information to you, and they arrive very late, and they say that I had lunch on the way. How do you feel, sir, in this situation? So Manasda sir and other audience might have now observed this situation. The same thing happens with every person.
So embarrassing, sir.
The time is, what is the importance of time? We have to wait. If the waiting period is very much appreciable and it's very much required, then that waiting will be pleasant. If the waiting goes beyond these things, and it will bring some kind of frustration, anxiety, some kind of angry aspect, then of course everybody will feel bad. The same thing happens in the classroom and in the communication skills also. So when we have to use provide the information, when we have to use the information, the chronemics plays in that matter. That is one of the examples. That is waiting, and you can arouse curiosity through waiting, as I said in the case of pausing. So that waiting period will be very fruitful if it is used scientifically, systematically, and educatively. You got it, sir? So waiting plays an important role in our teaching learning process also. We will wait until and unless a person is intended to make me wait. Otherwise, if it is an unnecessary waiting, everybody will be frustrated. Even if you give very good information after coming late to the class, if the students are starving, if they don't have interest in your class, if some other class they are expecting, if some other person they are expecting, if you at that time, if you take the class and talk to them, how do they feel? We all have been experienced throughout our lifetime in different situations, sir, Manasda sir. So,
sir, yes, sir.
Question at the wonderful time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. Good morning, sir. Thank you, sir, for your speech. My question is that, hello, sir.
Yes, Gopal Chandra,
can you hear me?
sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My question is that when we speak, there are verbal and non-verbal communication both. Is that true, sir? Only words are verbal and the tone, voice are the non-verbal communication. Is that true, sir?
Can you please ask your question once again, sir? With this.
When we when we speak, there are verbal and non-verbal communication.
Yes, sir, sure.
Only words are verbal, and when we speak words, the tone, the voice are non-verbal.
Yes, sir. Whatever we do, there are two communications which you can see. For example, on the screen, you are seeing a diagram in circles, correct? It is a blank screen. There is no verbal communication you can find, but there is non-verbal communication. Please observe a screen, the contrast between blue color and black color, and sky blue color with circles, correct? Some kind of information you are getting through the screen, and it is stimulating your brain, correct? When you look at the screen. So it is non-verbal communication, sir. When I speak something, my facial expression, my limb movements, my gestures, facial expressions, other things which are linguistic with my language. Everything is nonverbal communication. That's why I've taken more time for nonverbal communication before going to verbal communication. I've not finished my presentation, sir. Still, I have to say something about verbal communication, which is also important, because always we know that language is the vehicle of thought. And with the language, it has made easy for us to communicate with others. But here, the importance of communication skill is we have to have a purposive and desirable nonverbal communication with the audience or students, so that our effectiveness of communication will be increased. Because as we have seen in research studies, 93, more than 90%, more than 80% in some other research studies, non-verbal communication played a significant role in increasing the effectiveness of our communication. For example, if we speak for about 1 hour, if you assume that 100% effectiveness benchmark, then 90% and above communication will play a major role with non-verbal communication. We assume that we have spoken for 1 hour and verbal communication has given more effect on the audience, but it is not true. The non-verbal communication, what we are doing with the audience, maybe technologically or with my whole appearance or body language, with our paralinguistic aspects, everything is giving a lot of effect to the audience, sir. I hope the question is convinced.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Gopal, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, shall I move to now verbal communication with your permission? Any
Yes,
other
sir.
questions?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can do
Yes,
it.
sir.
Thank you. Don't hide your questions, because after this session, I'll be in the next session, I'll be going for value education, philosophical thoughts on education. So, with your permission, I'm moving to verbal communication now, because we all know verbal communication very much from our birth. We know how to speak to other person or audience, because we have been trained in our colleges and in our degrees how to speak with our audience. So we all know verbal communication very much, but there are some important things has to be considered with verbal communication. That is simplicity of language, because we always see that assume that when we use decorative or flowery language, our language will be very good. So in the case of English literature or any other language literature, it is correct. But usually when we communicate to other people, we have to know the pulse of the people, our audience or our students. So simplicity of language plays a major role in that particular case, because it grabs the attention of the audience. That is the first thing. It facilitates more listening, because when you speak something which is understood by everybody, it facilitates more listening to them, because listening makes learning. And it is favorable for all levels of students. I'm talking about average students, below average students, above average students. So a reasonable, simple language will be appropriate for everyone. And of course, it enhances the comprehension level of everyone. And also it increases the beauty of the language. We should not think that only decorative or flowery languages in any language will attract everybody. Sometimes that's why there are so many passive vocabularies that has to be taken care of. Because when we use passive vocabulary like decorative or flowery languages, that may not meet the need of the audience. They may not understand, like what we learned in the textbook at the end of a lesson. We used to see the glossary. Usually in poems, we used to see the glossary. We cannot understand the poems very easily without looking at the glossary. That's why in order to understand the language, the simplicity has to be maintained. Active vocabulary has to be practiced so that everybody will understand, because this is the day of using a foreign language like English. So because English is an international language, linked language, window to the world, it is a passport to employment. We say so many adjectives and advantages of English language, when it is not the language of the mass. So if you want to use English language, how simple it has to be made. Even if you take your own mother tongue, then you should, if you use a simple language, everybody will feel happy with that. So for a proper communication and effective communication, use simple language. Whenever it is required, use decorative or flowery language. If you want to make a speech in front of a very learned audience, and they can understand your decorative language and appreciate your decorative language, then go with that. That's why simplicity language is for mass, and flowery decorative language is for selected class. So please be aware of all these things during communications, and appropriate vocabulary has to be used because of getting correct meaning to the particular idea, which promotes clarity in thinking and imagination. The expression will be more specific when we use appropriate vocabulary, because we know how to use how to avoid the particular word very. Very beautiful, very great, very pleasant. These can be avoided by using a single word: excellent, awesome. These are the words can be used. So what appropriate vocabulary has to be used, that has to be identified by everyone, and that has to be practiced, which promotes students' vocabulary enrichment also when we use more and more vocabulary. And of course, in verbal language, because verbal language always connected with the language that is available in texts and dictionaries. When I utter a word in a language, that is verbal. When that language has no meaning in dictionary or in theory, that is non-verbal communication. So when I say language, grammar comes after learning the language by speaking and learning. Because we all know that we have to learn grammar not well in advance before learning a language. We have to learn grammar after learning a language. Please recall how you have learned your mother tongue. You have learned, we all have learned our mother tongue through imitation, through listening, through speaking, and then we started reading, writing. So this is the correct order of learning a language. After that, we went to school. In the school, we started learning grammar. And of course, when we talk about our mother tongue or regional languages, we use grammar correctly. But in the case of learning a second language, so if you don't use grammar properly, that may get into confusion. So to avoid misconception, to enhance the student's language, grammatical correctness is important, as well as clarity in expression is also important. When you express something, as I said, in the cycle of communication, the process of communication, the message will be delivered to the receiver. When it is the case, so message will be developed in the brain of the messenger. So that message will be in the form of encoded message in the beginning. As a human being, as a messenger, I have to decode that message properly. First, I have to have clarity and proper objective in my mind, and that message has to be delivered to the receiver in that particular case. So that will be reached to the receiver with a encoded message. If he is able to decode that message, that person, he or she, will be decoding that message, encoded message, and that will be reflected through the feedback. So this is the communication cycle. So clarity in expression is very much important, so that it reduces the misconception, because sometimes there are so many noise barriers of communication which will intervene, and which will be leading to such misconceptions. So to reduce the misconception, clarity has to be there both in the minds of messenger and receiver. So less complexity leads to more clarity. So make your language, nonverbal behaviors, nonverbal actions simple in order to avoid complexity. So listeners' attention will not be distracted through this clarity of expression. If you miss the clarity, if you miss the fluency, automatically this distraction will be there. Enhances the listening ability of the audience as well. So same thing will follow like fluency also. It captures the attention of the audience. It makes the language more comfortable, because if you are lagging, if you are murmuring, or if you are blank with our mind, then fluency will be affected. So less distraction, more comprehension will be there with this fluency, and enhances the beauty of the presentation, what we do. And of course, we all know about visual communication. When we talk about visual communication, in the case of classroom, there are 4 learning styles we talk about: audio learners, visual learners, audio-visual learners, and kinesthetic learners. So for audio-visual learners and visual learners, if you make them learn visually, comfortably, effectively, that will be more appealing. Even for the kinesthetic learners and audio learners, this visual learning is more effective, because you have to use a blackboard, a green board, or a chalkboard, or a technological devices like LCD projector, computer, slide presentation, videos, whatever it is. Everything comes under visual communication. You should know what to use, how to use, why to use, at what time to use, and what is the contrast that has to be used. How beautiful I can make the visual communication, how effectively I can make the visual communication with proper wordings, proper size of the letters, proper contrast, proper coloring, proper size. These are all various dimensions of visual communication. Because you are looking at me, you are looking at the slides that is coming on your computer. You just look at it. There is a lot of contrast between the colors that I have used in the text and behind the text and the graphical representations, the slides. So that visual communication has to stimulate, because there is a skill of what is that teaching that we say stimulation, skill of stimulation. When stimulation is more,